You have just read about a few ways that your own actions as a teacher might inadvertently or accidentally be contributing to your students' misbehavior in the classroom. As you watch this video, keep the following questions in the back of your mind. Which of these would I consider to be a weak point of mine? How can I take steps to fix this over the next week, month, or even year? You are a human being. And like any other human being, you are not perfect all the time. You have feelings like anger and sadness. You get tired and stressed out. Nobody expects you to be an unfeeling robot, but it is important for you to realize that the way you act, feel, and talk in front of your students will influence the way they are behaving. Simply put, if you're acting negatively, so will your students. But the only problems that don't have solutions are the problems we don't realize exist. So let's take a look at a few ways you might be contributing to your students' misbehavior so that it's possible to address those issues. If your students feel like they can't express themselves in the classroom because you are talking over them, that is, cutting them off and saying what you want to say instead of listening to them, your students may feel powerless and disrespected. They may have trouble following directions. The solution is to wait until you have everyone's attention before you start to speak. If you find yourself constantly rushing around the classroom feeling overwhelmed, trying to get everything done, then your students are probably feeling a little tense. Take a breath. Calm down. Revisit your curriculum or lesson plan and try to trim it down so you can take more time to get through the lesson and be prepared when you show up to class. If you require students to raise their hands before speaking, make sure you stick to this rule. When a student speaks out of turn, even if they are giving the correct answer or saying something brilliant, do not acknowledge it, except to tell them they have to raise their hand. Otherwise, you run the risk of letting students know it's all right not to follow this rule. You've got to be consistent. Continuing with lessons or instructions when students are inattentive or worse lets them know that less than their best is good enough. Wait until your students are giving you exactly what you want before moving on. Poor seating arrangements, extreme temperatures, or a high noise level are all distracting elements in a classroom that ultimately hinder the learning experience. The atmosphere in classrooms like these will result in behavior issues. If a student finds a lesson too difficult, not relevant, boring, or too easy, that student may not engage. She will feel bored and look for ways to distract herself, and these ways are generally disruptive to the rest of the class. Or perhaps your student finishes her lessons earlier than the rest of the class. In this case, again, the student will look for ways to occupy her attention, ultimately misbehaving in the process. Negative thoughts about students can bubble to the surface and be exhibited through body language, tone of voice, sarcasm, causing resentment, misbehavior, and ultimately revenge. Choose to see the best in your students, and that's what they'll give you. Similarly, showing frustration, taking behavior personally, and reacting emotionally are all self-sabotaging behaviors that will weaken your influence and undermine your ability to control your classroom. Instead, keep your cool and lean heavily on your classroom management plan. Take a breath. Take a beat. If you need to, step outside for a moment until you feel level-headed and calm again. Classroom clutter shows a lack of pride that rubs off on students and leads to unwanted behavior. A neat, attractive classroom, on the other hand, is congruent with and transfers to values like hard work, neatness, respect, and character. Students will grow to respect the classroom. No matter how hard you try, at some point or another, you will feel like you are outnumbered by your students and that you have totally lost control over the classroom. This is a natural feeling, but it does not need to be the truth. The real truth is that you are a role model and an authority figure to your students. You create the classroom experience you want your students to have through hard work and dedication. Never forget this. Let's review. In this lesson, you learned a few ways that your own behavior might be accidentally contributing to misbehavior in the classroom. Be careful not to talk over your students, rush around nervously or tensely, answer call-outs if you have a rule requiring students to raise their hands, move from one topic to the next if your students aren't paying attention or are acting out, letting your classroom environment become cluttered or unclean, letting the curriculum become too difficult, too long, or too short, thinking negatively about your students, or letting yourself feel defeated. Remember, you are a human being and you have decided to devote your life to something wonderful and something selfless. Nobody else expects you to be perfect. Just be sure to look back at your teaching philosophy often so you can keep an eye on the big picture and remember what inspired you to teach in the first place. Now is a good time to answer those questions you were asked at the beginning of the video.